Hi everyone. Thanks for joining. We know that there are a couple more people in the waiting room. As always, we'll wait for 2, 3 minutes to make sure that everyone who wanted to join has already joined. We had an exciting topic, as always, very new one for research. We're talking about AI and UX research. Very fresh topic to discuss. Just as a reminder, you're more than welcome to join with camera and with your microphone and say hi to everyone if you want to.
Hey.
Hi. Hey, Olga.
Hi, guys.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, nice. I I also used to do that a lot when we had meetups. I was either walking or driving or somewhere in the car or in the public transport. So that's great. Great to know that I was not the only one who was doing that.
Okay, maybe is there anyone who wants to share what sort of insights they want to hear about today in the session?
Just in case we're discussing building research team and research practices. But of course, you can ask about AI as well if you want.
Okay, maybe everyone is still shy and thinking about what they are expecting as an insight for today's session. So
Yeah, we're just waiting for 2 more minutes of awkward silence and we'll just jump straight
okay,
away to the
there are plenty
to
of
the
people
topic.
here.
Listen, if anyone can sit awkwardly in silence for 2 minutes, it should be a room full of researchers.
For sure. We should try to repeat the same experiment, unmuting ourselves, but still holding the silence. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
actually interesting. It feels like I think that a couple of days ago I saw somewhere in our chats like the updated version of Steve Portigal's book about interviews. Has anyone already read that? Like second edition or something.
Yeah, I knew he was revising it. I didn't know he had actually gotten it out the door.
Mm-hmm. Oh
So
yeah,
it's
it's Daria
hotel.
was the one who was sharing it. Well, one more
I have
minute
a
of awkward
question.
silence. Sure.
Can I raise a question? Yeah, I'm just tomorrow. I will start kind of usability testing, and I will invite to my research team 2 people who are actually one is UI designer and another is like generally project manager, kind of uh, general speaking person about design. And I was thinking to also not only run usability tests and also learn them about how to do it and what is important about it. And this is a challenge. I am not, don't have a team of qualified UX researchers to run a usability testing. I will try to run usability testing and learn that people to do it. Maybe you have some three advices insights how I can deal with it. Maybe you have that kind of experience previously.
I do. Yeah, I can touch on that very quickly. And I will probably talk more about that as we do the Ask Me Anything, and I kind of talk through my experience. My best experiences with that have been to help create structure for the people who are going to be coming in. So I usually start small, by creating note-taking guides. So I'll say like, hey, if you're going to be joining for these sessions, these are the things we're actually looking for. Because you really need to train them on like how to see. You're trying to get them to focus on the most important parts. And so giving them some structure and guidance so that they're not just picking out the things that's like most interesting to them. You kind of give them the ability to say like, oh, okay, this is what we're trying to learn. So I always have the goal of the session at the top of the note-taking guide that's like, our goal is to understand whether users can do X or understand whether people understand Y, like kind of the main research goal so that that orients them. I then do 3 to 5 bullet points that are just titled, What We'll Walk Out Knowing. And this is the thing that's kind of consistent across the entire project, which is like, what are, if nothing else, if you get nothing else from these sessions, what are like the 3 to 5 things you actually want to learn? Whether it's like, was the menu in the right place? Did people expect to see this over here? So kind of that like slightly lower, like more tactical research goals. And then I give them structured note-taking sections, which are things like very much task-based for usability, where it's like task number 1. And then there's a list of like, was the user able to do X? Were they successful? What did they go, like, did they follow the expected path? Did they express confusion? Like really, like did they have questions about the experience? So I kind of create the training through the process where it's like, one, that way I get notes out of it. Even if they're like not the best notes, they're like the notes on the topics I want to hear about. And two, it tells them kind of what they should be thinking about when they are running usability tests themselves. Like what should they be thinking about? Like what how do you know what to pay attention to when it is a moderated session? It's very difficult when you are not a trained researcher to know what is important in a research session. So I tell them, and then I make them take notes on it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your help. This is really supportive. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. It feels like we are ready to start. I see Anastasia raise her hand. We can start with just one more comment or question, and we will start with our discussion.
Okay, one more question. Maybe Jane will answer this question during her lecture as well. But yes, I work as an individual contractor, and sometimes I need a specialist. So I would like to ask two questions, like what are 3 non-obvious questions that I can ask to really test candidates' qualification? And the next question, maybe like later, it's not connected with this particular topic, but what are your favorite tools for usability tests? Because we just started to talk about them. So thank you in advance.
Yeah. For the first one, I like to, so anytime I'm hiring someone or anytime I'm looking for a specific quality, I think about what skills I don't want to have to teach them. Like, what are the things that I want them to be able to do when they walk in the door? And so in the case of a specialist, like if you're looking for someone, it may be around methodologies. So I think the first thing you need to decide is like, what specific skills do you want to make sure someone has as they're coming in the door? I'm somewhat notorious in my teams for saying I can teach any ding dong how to talk to users. Like I can. It's so easy to teach people how to talk to people. It's much harder to teach people how to take a bad research question from a PM and turn it into a useful research question. And so I think about like, I also hate teaching people how to do diary studies. So I usually look for people who already know how to do that. But like, so it's always a question of, anytime you're building a team, anytime you're looking for like someone to come in and solve a problem for you, what is the problem that you want them to solve? What are the skills you believe are required to be able to solve that problem? Whether it's really strong stakeholder management, whether it's specific types of methods, whether it's like expertise in a specific topic. And then that kind of gets me okay, these are the things that I know I need from this person, and I'm going to interview based on that. And I always ask for specific examples. So instead of saying like, tell me about how you, turn questions from stakeholders into research goals, I'll say, tell me about the last time you got a research question from a stakeholder that you knew wasn't the correct question. So I really look to get to ask hiring questions that are about specific experiences. Like, I talk a big game. I have a lot of philosophy. You can tell how well I translate it into practice by my actual examples. Like, it's very easy to have beliefs and theories. It's much harder to put those into practice. And so all of the questions I ask when I'm hiring are about, how do you put your beliefs and your skills into practice? So I always ask for very concrete examples, and I always say, tell me about it, like very much a researcher approach, right? Like, tell me about the last time you did this. Tell me about a time where you got buy-in from an executive team. Tell me about a time where you were able to change someone's mind with research. So like really getting into specifics. And then for usability testing tools, I'm obviously wildly biased, but I love Maze. That's why I work there. And I'm happy to talk to like why that is. I've worked at multiple vendors at this point. I've been running and building research practices for over a decade. So I've seen the evolution of the tool space. So I'm obviously like a deep believer in Maze within that space. But yeah, that's my personal choice for it.
I was expecting for the surprise
Thank
and to
you.
hear like, well, Jane works in Maze, and will there be any other tool that we will hear today? But yeah, of course, that's great. I don't know if all people know that current company that Jane works with is Maze, and position is Senior PM for Growth.
Yep.
I think that we are more than warmed up for the discussion. I just wanted to say hi once more to everyone who joined us today. Just as a reminder for those who are with us for the first time, we are the R9 research community. We are the largest Ukrainian-based community for people who do research and for UX researchers. We are now around 2,000 people, which is amazing. So we have different formats of collaboration with our participants, and different formats where we try to share knowledge about research. And one of them are online meetups. And honestly, for quite a long time, we had 0 meetups, and now we plan to start much more actively. So this is the first one in the last 6 months, I think. Amazing opportunity to talk more about UXR. And for that, we have a guest, Jane, who was very, very kind to accept our invitation. And I honestly thought that Jane's experience is very interesting because she started in the company with the team size of 100 people, and then had also an experience of working in the team with 7,000 people, which is definitely a very, very different scale. So we were discussing what would be the great topic to cover, and building UX research practices and building UX research teams on different stages of UX maturity, on for different sizes of companies and different markets they are working with. Sounded like a great topic to discuss. Today we'll have a mix of Ask Me Anything podcast FAQ session. We don't want to make it too formal and don't want to overwhelm ourselves with very structured lecture and slides. So we'll cover a couple of main topics, and as always for online meetups, you are more than welcome to join the discussion. Please unmute yourself, turn on the camera, and jump in with questions. We will definitely highlight when we open for the discussion. And today, Sophia helps me with the session. Sophia, would you like to have some other messages and discuss something else before we start with Jane?
Yes, so we also have an amazing opportunity today. I'm gonna send the link to our Colo foundation. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Fund where we are trying to help Ukraine, help our country, fight in this war. And we are going to have a giveaway. So Misha is going to have 1 hour of mentorship session with somebody between those who will donate today. So that's the thing I wanted to mention. Thank you. And I think I can give a word back to Jane.
Great. Yeah, Jane, we had enough of intro, so please, you are welcome. Mic is yours.
All right, excellent. So I will start by talking a little bit about my journey through UX research, so that you can get a sense for kind of the range of my experience. And then from there, we can kind of jump into some questions. I know Misha and I did a prep call where we've got a few topics that we'll probably want to dig into a bit more, and obviously want to hear from the group like what is relevant and top of mind and most interesting. So I'm Jane Davis. I have made the transition from UX research into product management. So I'm now on the other side of the table asking leading questions and just have forgotten everything I knew about research best practices. No, I've been a product manager for all of 7 months now. Prior to that, I was a researcher for over 12 years and got my start actually as an interaction designer back when we were calling them that. So I got into UX research because I meant to go become a librarian. And so I went to get my master's degree in library science and wound up going in a completely different direction and getting a master's degree in human computer interaction. I actually did a kind of double specialization. So I am technically also a library scientist, but I've really been in tech for the entire time. Please don't ask me to do library things. I will not be good at them. So after I got my master's degree, I was actually offered 2 different roles at BitTorrent, everyone's favorite way of, at the time, downloading Game of Thrones. Um, and they had 2 open roles. They had their lead user researcher role open, and then they also had an interaction design role open. And the thing about me is I'm a very mediocre designer. I am just not good at it, but I am very good at the problem space. And I love the problem space. I get kind of bored getting into like pixel level details. So I took a role with BitTorrent as their lead user researcher. It was a team of 2 of us for a company of about 150 at the time. And when I got there, there was an established research practice that was very survey heavy, and had very little institutional credibility. The founder of BitTorrent, Bram Cohen, was fully skeptical of the need for research, and just totally uninterested in what research had to offer, and just didn't understand it. And so my number one goal as soon as I got in the door was recognizing that that was going to be a blocker to research getting things done, because Bram had a lot of institutional power, even though he wasn't the CEO. And so my number one goal became help this person understand what it is I am doing here and how I can help him. So by the time I left BitTorrent, we'd actually created a research repository. We had gotten to the point where Bram, before I left, built me a custom conjoint analysis tool at my request. He just coded it up for me one day. And he was actively coming to me to ask for research help and for my perspective as a researcher. So that was really my first experience in the importance of finding the people who will be institutional blockers and making them your best friends. And so I brought that experience with me when I moved over to Dropbox. So BitTorrent did, they laid off basically almost all of their design and research team. And so and I had already been kind of looking to move on because it was my first job out of my master's degree, and I still was not that good at research, if we were being like very honest. And so I moved over to Dropbox, joined the research team there. At the time, it was a team of about 25 people, and just on the research team, and the overall company was about 1,500. And when I got there, I started as an individual contributor and then moved into a manager role when one opened up. They asked me to take over managing research for the growth organization at Dropbox. So I actually like got kind of a crash course in growth specifically and how that differs from a lot of more product focused research. That's actually where growth has become my specialty over the last several years and has been tremendously beneficial to me because it helped me operate as close to the things the business cared about as possible. So that was a really important and formative lesson. But one of the things I noticed with Dropbox was that the UX research team had a very bad reputation internally. They were also like, it's not that people didn't like us, but they didn't feel like we were contributing in meaningful ways. We were seen as very like slow, very academic, kind of overly precious in our approach and very like possessive of research as a craft. And when I started working with someone who has since become kind of like my PM best friend. But when I first started working with him, he was bringing me these incredibly, like, in my opinion, like bad questions where he'd be like, let's just run a willingness to pay survey. And I was like, I would never in my life ask people if they're willing to pay for something because you don't get useful information. So like, what are you actually trying to understand? And so I pretty quickly identified that like the main problem that the Dropbox research team had and that I wanted to help move past was this reputation of not getting insights that were relevant to the organization and being very slow. So there was this perception that like you asked research a question and 3 months later they came back with this like 15-page academic deep dive into a topic that may or may not be relevant to the thing that you were trying to learn. And so I started doing these sessions with the product managers and the designers in my area where I was just like, just talk to me about your problems. Talk to me about the decisions you're trying to make. Talk to me about what information you wish you had. Like not like you don't have to ask me research questions. I prefer if you don't ask me research questions. I want you to tell me what makes you nervous about what you're trying to do, and then I will help you understand how we can get that information. And sometimes that will be research, and other times that will be working with product analytics or going to our data science team or looking at what we already know about a topic. So a lot of what I did at Dropbox was actually like help PMs understand that the role of research isn't like to go off and conduct these in-depth academic projects. It's to help them identify the information gaps that exist and then go help them go fill those gaps and translate that into a point of view to make a decision. And so I started this process of doing like a multi-stage roadmap where I would say, here's this big thing we need to understand, this like giant topic. Rather than disappear for the entire quarter, what if we like broke it down into these smaller topics and these smaller projects. And I will be back every single week with new information for you. Like that was kind of the promise that I brought in at Dropbox, was like every single week you will have more information than the week before. Like might not be that much new information, but like every single week you will get something, a question answered that you didn't have answered last week. And so really that got PMs used to coming to me anytime that they had something that started to be like on their minds. And they learned to come to me like very early in the research question process. So instead of like building a product and then being like, is this usable? We got to a point where they were coming in and saying like, what do we know about how people are doing this currently, and might there be a product opportunity there? And so really getting the PMs into that shift, and making sure that they were able to start incorporating research into their everyday decision making, not just like these big decisions, but just like every single day thinking about like, what is the research point of view and what do we know about this? And I did a lot of maybe too much internal networking. But like I knew probably 1,300 of the 1,500 people who were working at Dropbox by the time I left. That was like, I spent so much time building bridges, because one of the things I saw happening, which I think is an opportunity for research to really shine, was that there were a lot of disconnects between teams that were working on like similar topics. And so the PMs wouldn't be talking. And that meant that like there was no cross-team collaboration happening. And so one of the big things I started doing at Dropbox was building this network so that I could bring these teams a little bit closer together and be like, hey, we're working on this aspect of collaboration, but I think this is also relevant to you all. Like maybe we should be talking. And so it created this sense of research being a bridge builder, and this bridge between to increase collaboration. And that really helped my team also leverage my internal network so that they could start building those bridges and modeling that behavior as well. And sort of by the end of it, it turned into this situation where like the growth research team was coordinating across like all of these other like research teams as well as product teams, and kind of bringing people together on topics. So we really got seen as not just answering relevant questions, but actually like forming institutional bonds that hadn't existed before, which is like one of the most powerful things you can do as a researcher, because you are empowered to go out and create those connections, and you can kind of take an expansive view. So Dropbox, I was there for almost 5 years. And by the end of it, I got to a point where I had really reached a situation where the story I told to Misha that I'm going to tell to this group as well is I had this big project where someone was like, hey, the executive team wants to know like everything there is to know about expanding these types of accounts. And I'm going to be a little bit coy on like the details because this is being recorded and it's going to be online. But so I had this big question from like executive leadership that was like, what do we know about expansion? And I pulled together the best work of my life. Like seriously, some of the best research I've ever done. I brought in like all the research we had previously done. I had brought in like sources from strategic finance and like product analytics and like all of this stuff, and created this incredible synthesis and did this like really informed point of view, and was like, okay, the problem is this. And I presented this to the leadership team, and the CEO of the company was like, yeah, that's interesting, but I still think it's this other thing. And I was like, okay, I gotta go. Like this is this is I've done the best work of my life, and I got nothing left. Sorry, the sunlight in my office is very odd this time of day, so I'm adjusting constantly to deal with the window. But yeah, so I realized I'd kind of hit my local maxima for impact. And I think like as researchers and as someone who's managed a lot of researchers, I know that one of the things that burns researchers out fastest is when we feel like our work isn't having an impact, right? Like that is like so demoralizing, is to like go out and do really great work and to have that just ignored. Like that's a really rough feeling. And so and like the process, I think, of building a career in research is all about like how do you have gradually increasing impact. Um, and in my case, I was like, okay, well, I'm presenting to the executive team and got stonewalled. So it's time for me to like look to my next step. So from there, Zapier had reached out to me and they were looking for a new head of research. They had someone move into the role from an IC role. That person was not like really a big fan of managing people. That is like never where they really wanted to go in their career. And so they were looking for someone to come in and put structure to the program. And they had some very explicit goals for what they wanted from research, which is incredible. Like now that I've interviewed with a lot of companies and had a lot of research roles, it's unbelievably common to get in the door and have them be like, yeah, we weren't exactly sure why we were hiring a head of research. Like, what do you think you should be doing here? Is like a very odd thing. And when a company doesn't understand what you should be doing there, that's like I mean, one, it doesn't feel great because it's very hard to be successful without someone else helping define what success looks like for your role. But two, like incredibly risky situation when a company doesn't understand how you contribute value. Uh, and so, but Zapier was like, we want every single person in the company to be able to participate in research. That was like their top goal. And I was like, okay, that is huge, but you know what you want from this. Like you are very explicit. I can work with this. Um, and so I came in and they had a bunch of research headcount just like ready for me, which has never happened before or since in my career. Actually, that's not true. Zoom had a few headcount waiting for me, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But Zapier, like I came in, they were like, we have 4 more headcount for you. And I was like, that is so many researchers, incredible. And they were like, and you can use those to make sure that everyone at the company can do research. And I was like, I don't know how 4 researchers are going to solve that problem, but I do know how 1 head of research operations will solve that problem. And so I actually wound up pausing hiring on researchers and selling the company on research operations as the actual solution to their problems. And so we found this incredible head of research operations. He actually wound up taking over the practice at Zapier after I left. And so he and I really designed the practice from the ground up. We got to design like an ops first research practice, which is like an incredible gift. Like very few researchers and research leaders ever get to go in and really like start from there. And two, let's see if I can get some of that. There we go. The other thing that we got to do was actually like have that executive buy-in from the very outset, where the executive team knew what they wanted from us and all we had to do was execute. And it was a ton of work to execute, but it was very like a very clear cut goal for research. And so like 3 months in, I had like hired this incredible guy, Roy. We had set up like all of the systems we needed. We used Zapier to do a ton of the like automations and things like that. 3 months in, we had it like set. Like was like, okay, cool. Where do I go next from here? I've accomplished the main goal that they wanted me to accomplish. And so from there, it was a lot of like training and increasing research maturity and literacy and things like that, as well as getting the team operating strategically since they now had like a little bit more bandwidth for that. But I got to a point about a year and a half in where I was like, I actually feel like anyone could run this team now. Like I had staffed up the research team. I had this incredible head of research ops. I was like, I don't think there's anything I'm doing specifically that is like that's using the talents that I love to bring to the table. And at the time, Zoom reached out to me, and like it was 2021, which was an interesting time to be hiring a head of research for the first time. But Zoom was looking for their first ever director of UX research. They'd never had UX researchers before. And bear in mind, like it was a 10-year-old company, 7,000 people, but they had been entirely enterprise focused. And when you're enterprise focused, you already have a lot of user inputs. You've got folks coming to you from your sales team. You've got your customer support tickets. Like you get a lot of inputs because you're B2B. They still should have had a research team. I want to be very clear on that. Like there was an extreme disconnect between what users were actually doing and what the company thought was important. But so they reached out and they were like, we need a head of research. And I was like, cool, who am I replacing? They were like, we've never had UX research before. And I was like, well, that seems like a situation I am uniquely well positioned to go in. And I was coming off the heels of like going into Zapier and very immediately having impact and solving the exact problem they wanted me to solve. And I was like, great, I have a playbook. Like I'm ready to run this playbook. I can I can just do what I did at Zapier and we'll be fine. Like I was like, great, I'm gonna take everything I already learned. I'm just gonna go in and run my playbook from Zapier. Uh Basically immediately I failed on just like in every possible respect. I failed to sell the company on research operations as a need. I failed to properly identify the locus of power. So I thought that like the chief product officer, who is my boss's boss, was the person that I really needed to sell. And it turned out he had like zero institutional power. Like he was not at all the person that I should have been focused on kind of winning over and helping understand and like enlisting as an ally in getting research, more resources, and like a better understanding across the organization. Um, like I And what was happening was that like there was so much hunger for research all the way up to like the heads of product. Like every individual head of product, like so we had at Zoom, we had like there was a head of meetings, there was a head of chat, there was a head of webinars, like each line of business had a head of product. Every single one of those people, without exception, was desperate to get research. And that's where that was like where our level of institutional influence ended. Everyone from above, like everyone up from there, including the chief product officer, really had zero interest in UX research. Um, and really just like was not sold on anything that we brought to the table. And so we had this incredibly difficult situation where we had like a lot of power at the product level and like very little power or buy-in at the institutional and organizational level. And I think one of the things that I personally believe about like director level positions and up is that the main value you should be bringing to the business is actually helping them make business decisions. It's not like staffing up a research team. It's not like creating a research roadmap. It's literally how do you shape an organizational point of view? That's the thing that I think differentiates like directors from senior managers. Like you are actually shaping organizational point of view. And there's not really a way to do that when you can go into a meeting with the CEO of a company and present research that's like, people like this experience significantly better. They are more successful. It is less confusing. It is better on every possible metric. And have him look at it and say, well, I don't see a problem with that experience, so we're going to keep it the way it is. I have terrible news about why Zoom's in-meeting chat hasn't changed in the last like 5 years. It's not because they don't have people working on it. And so there was kind of this, I immediately realized that there were like years worth of work to get, and it might never actually happen, to get that kind of like director level impact, because the team, like, one the other thing I did at Zoom was like staffed up the team very immediately, and we quickly identified like what are the key lines of business we need to support, where's like where's the bulk of the institutional need, and we aligned directly to that. So we like embedded researchers on these lines of business, and they immediately started having impact. Like they were like incorporated into the team's rituals. They were like eagerly embraced by product and design. Like everyone was so excited to have research like as part of their day to day. And then I was kind of in this weird like floating limbo position, because I had this team that was having incredible impact at the product level, and I was just stuck in a place where I could not get things done organizationally. Um, and so that was like an incredibly frustrating experience, but it also helped me realize that none of the things that I did at Zapier were really like it. It wasn't that I ran a good playbook at Zapier. It's that I understood the problem that they wanted research to solve, and I did the legwork to understand how to get that problem solved and who needed to be bought into the solution I was proposing. And so when I went over there and was like, great, I'll run this playbook, I skipped all of the important steps, right? I skipped the research steps. Never skipped the research steps. But I had skipped understanding what Zoom actually thought research could do for it, and like why they were hiring a head of UX research at that point. I skipped understanding the actual institutional power structures and where the power existed and who needed to be bought into research. I had kind of skipped all of the things that actually at BitTorrent, at Dropbox, and at Zapier had made me successful, because I had confused the solutions that I brought to those places, and like the fact that those solutions were successful. I'd confused that with being the right solution for any research organization. When what I did well at all of those places was I identified who had institutional power, and who needed to be like, who would be an effective advocate for research. I understood what they were trying to actually accomplish with a research team, like what they felt UX research could provide. Um, I understood like the blockers to getting research incorporated into institutional decision making, whether it was like at Dropbox, the literal problem was that people left us off meeting invites. And so a lot of my job was literally just reminding teams to send meeting invites to researchers. But like that wouldn't have worked at Zoom. Everyone already sent us meeting invites, and we still couldn't get like higher level decisions impacted. So like I I really misunderstood that the thing that I did that was powerful at each of the previous companies was deeply understanding the organization, rather than any given approach to building the research team there. Uh, yeah. And yeah, so that's it. That is like how I have my career in building research teams, and now I'm a product manager, and I have a totally different set of problems that I am also extremely bad at the moment.
Jane, what an amazing journey. I was, first of all, I've heard this story before, but still, today I learned something new, and I still have some interesting ideas from our previous discussion. So, I have loads of questions. I will start maybe with first one or two, and then we'll open up for questions for the audience. But I like a lot of things that you've commented here resonated a lot with me and with my team. And I really liked how you highlighted the idea of identifying this locus of power identifying who is the person or who's the group of people you have to work with. So is there a chance that we can summarize some of the best practices or your advice on how to identify that properly? Because you gave us examples where you identified or misidentified in some cases whom you should work with, and in some cases it was like top to bottom. In some cases it was going in a different directions. Somewhere you had to work more with C-level people, somewhere you had to find your allies among your peers, PMs, and designers. So are there any advice on how to properly identify who are the real locus of power in the team?
Yes. There are a couple things I do when I join an organization now. The first thing I do is I start making note of whose name keeps coming up. So when I was at Dropbox, for example, there was PM John Adams. He like became my like best ever product manager buddy. He was totally skeptical of research when we started. Like I was basically like as a new IC at Dropbox, they were like, "You're gonna help John," and I was like, "Interesting." And then I met with John, and he was like, "Yeah, unless you want to run this survey for me, I don't see what you can do for me." And I was like, "Interesting." But his name had kept coming up, right? Like people would be like, "Oh, John's working on that. Oh, John, John's got an interesting deck on that." Like I think the number one question to ask is like, who is getting listened to at these organizations? Um, and the way to understand that is to understand who is getting talked about. Like who gets talked about is like, oh, they've got a deck on that. Oh, they understand this. A great example from where I am today. Like I joined Maze and I was like, and as a PM, it's very different because you have like a certain amount of authority and uh, kind of institutional power baked into the role in ways that like I didn't really when I was a researcher, but I still was like listening for like, oh, who's got interesting perspectives, right? It's not like I don't ever want to make this transactional, but I do want to understand who the organization respects and who the organization is like who's bringing ideas to the organization. One, because that's an opportunity for me to learn from them. And two, because it really is like it kind of tells you like it will help you get a very fast sense of what the organizational perspective is. Like if you can find the people that the organization respects, and then you can understand what those people think about research, you can kind of get a shortcut to like, okay, what is the overall organization like think? So I look for people who are mentioned a lot. I look for people who present a lot, who are kind of just like keep bubbling up in conversation. And then I just make a note to like reach out to them and say like, hey, I'm new. I'm interested in better understanding like your role and what you do. And yeah, would love to hear more about like how we can be effective partners and like your relationship to research. So that's I literally just like listen to gossip. It's like the number one thing I do. Organizations love to gossip, and there are always kind of like you notice the patterns and you see people's docs coming up over and over again, or people getting mentioned, or they'll be like, oh yeah, someone like so and so has something about this. Like listen to those names, and every time you hear one, just be like, that person has something they can tell me, not necessarily about research or my job, but about how this organization works.
We already have a new topic for different online meetup, like social listening inside of the team and how to control all the channels of information. Just to follow, I see that we have some questions. Just wanted to follow up because it's really important, and specifically partially for my case as well. What can one do in the situation if someone who is being listened to does not really have a lot of buy-in into research? Because you mentioned a different situation when you decided to switch, and actually instead of trying to get support from that one most important person, you decided to go with an alternative route and get support from many other people, maybe not on the C level, but still you found a different way to find this leverage. So could you please comment on that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of figuring out whether someone is open to changing their perspective. One of the questions I now ask when I interview at new organizations is, tell me about the last time you changed your mind. Um, and that's something that like I do internally as well. Well, I'll be where I'll say like ask people like, hey, like tell me about the last time someone brought you information that changed your perspective on a topic, or like tell me about the last time you learned something and made a different decision based on it. One, like if someone has never changed their mind based on new information, you can just move on. That's not a useful person to you. If there's no like story that comes to mind, and they're like, that's can't really think of anything off the top of my head, you can be like, okay, this is probably not going to be my research advocate. Um, we are in the business of changing minds based on new information. That is the research job, right? Like it is pay you to have an opinion that is better than other people's. Um, and so I think if you do find those folks, um, the that like are really kind of stuck in their I don't trust qualitative research, or I'm not sure how to work with you, or things like that. Even if I think they might eventually come around, there's a group of like it's worth saying to yourself, like, is this the fastest way to get institutional impact? Right? Like I could have spent 2 years trying to get the CEO of Zoom to like deeply understand UX research and all of these things. But the way to ensure that things would get better for users immediately was to start working with the people who were open to research as a decision input. And so a lot of that was like looking to where the requests are coming from. We had I like instituted this policy at Zoom, which was we don't seek out research. We have more than enough requests coming in and people that want to talk to us. And so we talk to the people who want to talk to us. And that strategy works really well when a lot of the people who want to talk to you are like heads of product. Because that means that like if they have individual PMs in their line of business who are research skeptics, they're like they see this person with institutional clout being excited about it and kind of come along. And so I try to evaluate how long and how much effort I think it will take to bring someone on side with research and say, is this the best way I could be using my time and my team's time? Or are there alternative ways where we could start having an impact? The number one thing I look for is really like who is accountable for decision making in the organization. Like and look for the people who are making decisions. That's where research should be, is informing decision making. And so like, okay, the CEO makes a lot of decisions. Well, who else makes a lot of decisions? The chief product officer makes a lot of decisions and his team makes a lot of decisions. The head of design makes a lot of decisions. Like, and so really going after what decisions are getting made and what's the highest level of decision making you can get successfully embedded in, without a huge effort, I think is kind of like the number one approach I use. The other thing I did at BitTorrent that was shockingly successful was I just talked very, very loudly about how great research was in front of Bram all the time. And eventually he just kind of like, I don't know if I just like brainwashed him into it, but like he just kind of like saw me being very enthusiastic and very, very vocal. I'm very like, hey, this is important and this does good things and these are the good things it does. And that actually like really, really helped him come around because I could be like, we didn't ship this thing because users said it was unusable. And so we saved the engineering team time. So like some of it is just being very excited about research, as it
I think
turns out.
this is the best moment that UX researcher can get in the team. Jane, thank you so much. We have well, quite a lot of questions. Before we open up for Diana, who was the first one to raise the hand, I just wanted to remind everyone that we still have an open link for donations. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to do that, you are more than welcome to do it. So Diana, please, you were the one who raised the first hand. Please go on with your question.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep.
Sure.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jane. Pleasure to meet you. And it was a beautiful talk. And I was also excited to hear that you're HCI alumni,
Yes.
as well as I am. And that's something that I was shocked with since I graduated, because, you know, we've been taught a lot of beautiful things about research and about people and ethics. And now I'm back to corporate job, and I am overwhelmed with the, how do I put it, the responsibility of knowledge that I have about good practices and how to do things nicely, and yeah, the reality of corporate world, and yeah, pressure of decision makers. And I want to ask you if you have any advice on you know, how to deal with that, how to persuade decision makers with your research to do, you know, good thing to do. I specifically
Yes.
work with web accessibility, and yeah, you go on. Thank you.
Yeah. So when Misha and I had a conversation about this, I went like deep into my capitalist theory thing. So I will touch on that a little bit because that's actually like very important here. So the thing I always think about in this situation is like, I ultimately need to convince people who consider themselves responsible for profit making, right? Like most of us work in for-profit organizations. Their job is to actually like make money either for themselves, for shareholders, for like, right? Their job is like, a company's job is to try and maximize profits. And so a researcher's job is to try to help companies understand the ways in which making things better for users helps them maximize profits. It's like genuinely, this is like a very, it feels kind of mercenary and cynical sometimes, but like the number one thing you can do as a researcher to get buy-in is not going to be explaining to people that like it's better for users. You have to finish that sentence with, it's better for users and that will be better for us because the reason companies care about user experience is because they think that a better user experience will get them more profits. And so every time we are advocating for something, and accessibility is a great example here, right? Because like, given the choice, a lot of companies will not prioritize accessibility because there is not a clear line to profit. That sucks. That's just it straight up sucks that is true. Our job is to help them draw that line between accessibility and profit, or accessibility and risk to profit. So saying like, hey, if we don't prioritize fixing these accessibility issues, like for one, Europe has a giant accessibility law that's passed that is coming into effect in, I believe, 2025, maybe 2026. The US also has a set of standards that are going to start being enforced in 2026. So there's a compliance, like you can use that as a like, this will create risk to our business if we don't address it. That is like always a useful lever to pull. And the other thing is to help them understand why an accessible product actually increases profits. And the reason an accessible product increases profits is that you expand your total addressable market. Disability is contextual, which means accessibility is actually just a subset of usability. The more usable your product, the more your users are going to stick around and pay for it. Like companies are pretty bought into that. And so helping them see accessibility really as a subset of usability more broadly, and as something that if they don't engage in it, endangers the business is probably the most effective way to like really get them aligned with user needs. But like really the job of researchers is constantly to help draw the line between this is better for users and this is better for our company. Like making things better for our users will help us win at capitalism. It's like the sentence you want to be able to say to your stakeholders. And
That's
I can go
beautiful.
on for ages about why that's just really maybe not my favorite thing in the world, but that is the system we are currently operating in, and so we will operate in it for now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Jane. Beautiful
Yeah, of
answer.
course.
We have a couple more questions. So I see Alena with her hand rising, but there was the question before that from Sonia. Thanks for sharing your experiences, Jane. When building a research team, what's the ratio you are aiming for, if any, researchers to PMs or designers?
So when I was at Dropbox, I tried to play the ratio game. I tried to say like, okay, we've got 5 designers on this team. We need at least one researcher. And it was like usually 1 to 3 was the one we like tried to argue for. And then after about a like year of trying that at Dropbox, I realized that like even when we had hit the ratio of like 1 researcher for every 3 designers, uh, it wasn't going well. Like there were some teams where the researcher just didn't have enough to do and wound up subbing in on other teams. And there were some teams where like even with 1 researcher for the 3 designers, they were just underwater all the time. And so I actually moved the growth research team at Dropbox to align to organizational goals. So like the way growth worked was we had kind of these pillars that we would work on, and we're like, okay, we want to work on expansion, acquisition, etc. So we actually aligned researchers to the problem the organization was trying to solve, rather than a ratio of designers and PMs. And that had the benefit of actually making sure that we were going after the most pressing problems, and that we were able to draw a clear line between what we were working on and the decisions that were getting made every single day and that needed to get made. So I don't stress about ratios anymore. I'm team size agnostic generally. I'm structurally agnostic as well. Like I don't think there's a one good way to structure a research team. It's really about understanding what decisions need to get made and how those decisions get made, and then figuring out the best place to put researchers so that you can inform those decisions. So all of that is also dependent on just being like, okay, but everybody's also able to like run their own concept testing and messaging testing, and like empowering designers to kind of get information themselves as well. But yeah, I'm very much like, what is the organization trying to do? And then like put your researchers on those problems.
Thank you so much, Jane. Alena, you have your hand. Please ask your question.
Right, Jane, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I loved your storytelling and your honesty, and it was pleasure to hear you today. I've recently transitioned from customer support to research, so I'm just starting my journey, and I'm the only researcher in my team. So, my question is, if you were starting your career today, what would you focus on first?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Um, I would focus on understanding learning how to operate effectively in businesses, and like understanding how decision making gets made, and like what and how to socialize effectively. Because I think that's something that like you can pick up methods as you go, right? Like there's a lot of things you can learn on the job, and that people will give you space and time to learn for. Like there's so many things that you're like, great, I'm not a survey expert, but I could become one. But really understanding how to get people to listen to you and understanding which people you need to listen to you is like the one skill that is going to like stay with you both like in a research role but outside of the research role as well. So that's, I think that's really like where I go is like making sure you have a really flexible range of ways that you socialize information and not just like research findings, but also like getting really good at socializing research questions. Like getting good at like getting people to orient around a different research question. Getting good at sharing like, you know, uh just like building your toolkit of ways that you share information. So like the things that I do or have done in my career that have been like super effective have been like at Dropbox, I sent out like a weekly newsletter of all of the research that had happened across the entire research team. And I kept trying to like let other researchers also send it out sometimes because it got me like the entire company read that email and asked me questions and saw me as the face of like research getting done. And I kept trying to explain that to the team like, this is very powerful and people, you will get institutional power from sending an email. Um, no one ever wanted to do it because like you also had to write an email, I guess. I that was a weird one, but like newsletters, bullet point, like just being becoming really adept in sharing every level of information and in all the possible formats is going to be the thing that really lets you operate effectively across organizations. So that's, I would focus really heavily on like how I socialize, how I write up findings, getting really good at like visualization is like a crucial researcher skill, like getting good at designing decks and getting really crisp on like writing up bullet points and findings. That I think like people try to let findings speak for themselves and they don't. Like I said earlier, like a thing I frequently would tell researchers I hire is I pay you to have a point of view. And like the way to get buy-in for a point of view is by presenting information in the way that's meaningful to an organization. And that'll be different at every organization. So like trying lots of things, learning lots of skills around like how you build reports and decks and like atomic evidence and things like that. That is the first thing I would do because everything else you will learn on the job.
I really liked our discussion like that we had before on the prep call, and I think one of the ideas that you used there was like research not necessarily has to work in the PMs or like in the product org base, but UX researchers definitely have to socialize in the same pace. So yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting observation.
Yeah, I think like I, touched on that, which is like every week I promise PMs will learn something they didn't know the week before. And it is like research doesn't have to happen at the pace of product management or design, but research socialization does. And so like it doesn't matter if you're like able to bring back like this fully fledged thing, like what they need from you is to learn a little bit more every single week so that they're better at their job.
Great brand promise. I think more and more I listen to you more and more. I think that UX researchers definitely have a lot to learn from marketers in terms of how to communicate about our own work.
One of the
Thank you
most
for
annoying things I say is that research is actually a sales role. But it is. I mean, like it is more of a sales role than it is a research role in once you start working in for-profit organizations in particular.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for for that response. We have one more question. So I see Sonia's question about transition from UX research to PM, which definitely also a very interesting topic for me. If you don't mind, I will follow up with questions on research teams and then we'll come back to the topic. So we had one more from, just give me 1 second, from Lou. Lou, if you want to, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If no, I can read it out.
Yeah. Okay, I'm here. Yeah, this is a very good listen to your whole story and sharing. Yeah, so my question is, if you can elaborate on how growth researchers are different from others, that would be great.
Yes. So bearing in mind, I'm extremely biased because I love working in growth. And there's a reason that I've stayed in that field for like in that area of organizations for a long time. But the reason I love it and the reason I think it's different is that you are actually responsible for the end-to-end user journey in a way that it you almost never are in other research roles. And that's because growth is responsible for every part of the funnel from like into the product all the way through making sure customers stick around or users stick around in your product. Like, so it's like, um, we call it, some companies start at awareness, which is just like people have heard of your product. Most companies start at acquisition because it's much easier to impact acquisition. But like you start from like, how does someone actually come and sign up for your product or start using your product? All the way through, like, how do you make sure someone stays and is continuing to get value? And there are like very clear touch points along that process, which are like acquisition, engagement, acquisition, activation, engagement, retention / churn. And then expansion can be a part of that as well. So there's like, it's growth looks at all of that. And growth's job is to successfully move users through that process and ensure that like they are getting value from the product in such a way that they continue to give you money and ideally give you more money over time. Nobody else kind of works on that, right? Like when you are working specifically on a product or a line of business, you're looking at like, how do they use this part of our product? Or how do they, like, what's their workflow around this feature or like this problem? In growth, you have so much responsibility for all of it. You get to understand everything about how users come in and move through your product. And you have a lot of say you have a lot of kind of permission to go I mean, I guess like metal is the term that comes to mind. Like you get to kind of play at every point in the journey and dig into any problem along there that's interesting that you think will help users successfully continue on their product journey. So that's what drew me to it, is that like it is about understanding full workflows, and I just love understanding like journeys and workflows. That's very satisfying. The other thing that growth researchers do that I think a lot of other researchers don't is they take responsibility for metrics in a way that it's kind of harder to do on product team, like more traditional product teams. And what I mean by that is like, when I was running the growth research team at Dropbox, we could point to projects that we did that led to the company making millions of dollars. This wasn't like, oh, this is like we contributed research. It was literally like we came up with this research project idea and ran this and said, this is going to make us money. And so it's much easier to connect what you do to the thing that the business ultimately cares most about, which is money. And so you can say like, hey, we contributed to these initiatives, and growth teams are generally much better at saying like, here's all of the ways our initiatives made the business successful monetarily. And you can say, great, here's all the places my team contributed to those initiatives that made the business money. And so there's like you have a more direct line to the language that executives understand best. So yeah, and there's I would say the other thing, and I don't think this is unique to growth, but I think it is something where like you're forced to do it rather than like you're able to do it, is working really closely with analytics teams. Like my closest partners at Dropbox, beyond just like the PM and the designer, were product analytics people and strategic finance, like the people who run the numbers. And like that's because in growth, it's not enough to just know what people are doing in your funnel. You need to know why they're doing it. And so like there's this deep partnership that happens with analytics that also helps the organization understand what UX research contributes in a way that makes it very tangible, because you're like, hey, 30% of people fail to take this action we want them to take. And now we know why. And here's what we're going to go do about it. So it really like it answers full pieces of the puzzle. And that's like you can work with analytics on in any part of the org, but in growth, it is like a requirement of being successful.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jane. We also have the follow-up question from Sonia on number of researchers. It felt like we've already discussed it, but just in case if we have something to add here, how do you argue for hiring more researchers, linking the amount of problems to the number of researchers or something else? And how do you understand when you actually need more?
That is actually that is I like managing small teams. I don't ever want to manage like a 100+ person team. That just sounds like nonstop paperwork for me. So like bear in mind that that's my bias here. But I spend a lot of time, and like at Zapier in particular, but like Zapier, Zoom, Dropbox, like all of these places are places where I spend a lot of time saying like, what are the risks to our business? Like we have these goals. We have these like big initiatives that we want to accomplish in the next year. Like during annual planning is like the best time for this. Saying like, here's the big stuff we want to go do next year. Okay, what are the associated risks to the business for each of these? Like, what are the unknowns in each of these areas? And for every one of those kind of big unknowns, I should have a researcher, or I should be confident that like we have that information somewhere else. And so that's really how I staff. It's just like understanding all of the places we know we will need research inputs. And that's like that also like happens in conversations with like different PMs and heads of product and the head of design, and saying like, okay, cool. Like what kind of research support are you looking for in the next year? Like, where do you think research can be most impactful? Like, if it were up to you, like how many researchers would you have? Like, how much support would you have? Like, what would you do with that support? And so really understanding like what is the organizational appetite for more researchers, and then combining that with like, okay, here are the big things we want to accomplish next year, and here's how many researchers I think we need to make sure we've resourced those. And I kind of combine that and I bring that entire number to the organization, and I'm like, okay, here's the head count that like all of your product people and design people are asking for from research. Like we need this many researchers to resource these like the day-to-day product work of research. Here are the problems that we are trying to solve next year. We cannot resource all of these like big initiatives and all of this day-to-day work with our current set of researchers. Here's how many people I think we will need in order to do that. And here are the trade-offs if we don't. Like, here's where I usually present, like, here is where we could be lean if we needed to. And here are the things we wouldn't do if we like with that plan. Like here's the initiatives we wouldn't staff. Here are the lines of business where we wouldn't embed researchers. Like here's where it would hurt. Uh, and then like I give the best case scenario plan, which is like, here's what you would get if we resource at this level, which is like every single initiative would have a dedicated researcher. They would actually be able to partner with like the product team researchers to make sure that everyone's um, getting the inputs they need. Here's where I think we could save headcount by not resourcing in this way. Like I try to bring a very realistic picture and then just get very clear on like, here's what we won't do. Like there's this, I will always say no. It's an important function of a research leader. I actually won't say no. I'd say yes, but, which is like, yes, but you can only have it in 9 months. Like, yes, but it will take us 8, like, twice as long. Or yes, but it will mean we don't do this other thing. Like, there's always a trade-off. And yeah.
What's your take on, like, if you say yes, but have you ever engaged with like third-party research agencies? Okay, we need to run something quickly. Like, how do you understand that? Yeah, that's maybe that's the case when we can pay extra and get help.
Yes. I have a 2x2 matrix for this because executive teams love 2x2 matrices. That's a learning from way early in my career is you can sell an executive basically anything if you present it in the top right quadrant. So I'm glad this is going on YouTube for posterity. But like it is true, right? Like you can just help them. A 2x2 is a very easy way to understand the things that are important and how you prioritize within that. And so like the thing I always show is like um there is on the x-axis is organizational context and on the y-axis is research expertise, right? And so like if you think about it, you need high organizational context, but like low to medium research expertise for things where there's not like a huge risk to the business, but you want to get user input. This is stuff like early stage concept testing. It can be things like messaging refinement. It can be things like usability testing, stuff where you want to empower people with high organizational context and give them like appropriate training and guardrails to make sure they're not asking like disastrously bad questions. But like the organizational context is the important part. Then there's the stuff where research really shines. That's like high organizational context and high expertise. These are the things that are like related to big decisions the business needs to make. And it needs to have a level of confidence in the research output that it doesn't necessarily like for the high context, low expertise. That's like what your research team should be spending all of your time on, ideally. Then there's the stuff that's high expertise, low context. That could be things like we want to understand, like market research is a great example for this. Like you don't need a lot of institutional context, but you do need to be pretty good at some very specific methods to go do like a landscape analysis or like pricing sensitivity surveys and things like that. So that's also how I think about presenting it as like, here are let's map the questions we have to like what requires context and expertise, what requires context but not expertise, what requires expertise but not context, and then like don't do things that don't need context or expertise. That's like not a useful thing. So that's how I think about like getting organizational buy-in for outsourcing is like, we know this is a big question. We know we need this information. We don't need to get it in-house. So like, here's where we can like, here are the questions we could outsource if we wanted to like, that we know we need to answer that don't need to be answered by us as researchers specifically.
Cool. Thank you so much. We have one person, Anastasia, you have your hand raised, please.
Hi, hi again. Jane, I would like to ask, what is the main principle by which you usually divide the work in a team of researchers? Like, is it by projects or but what kind of tasks?
Yeah, usually and it will totally depend on the organization. I've done it by like initiative where it's like, okay, this is, the entire company is thinking about I'm trying to think of a good example. at Zapier, we were like, okay, what should we do to make our product more accessible to consumers, right? Like Zapier is like great for people who are experts at thinking through like coding workflows. It's very hard to learn though. And so there was a whole initiative around like, let's make the product learnable. So we resourced at that level because we were like, great, a number of different teams are going to be working on that initiative. There's a ton of different work streams around it, but the overall question is like the thing we're going to resource. At Zoom, it was very much like, okay, what are the products? Because the products acted kind of independently of each other, almost like they were their own little lines of business. It was like, great, which products does the organization depend on like bringing in money, and which of those want research resources? And so we like embedded at the product team level for that. At Dropbox, we like went back and forth depending on how we were reorganizing that like at any given time. So like we would start embedded with like product teams on the like or like individual teams on growth. Then after that, like we shifted to initiatives. For a while we actually aligned to phases of the user journey, which was pretty great because you'd have researchers who were like, you had one researcher who was expert in acquisition and another in activation and another in expansion, and you actually got like the end-to-end journey across the research team, so you knew who to go to answer questions about like, hey, what's stopping people from like using this one feature. And so it's really, I think, about understanding like how the organization thinks about the decisions it has to make, and what where those decisions are getting made, and like how researchers will be best able to plug into that decision making. That is, I have organized research functions in just a lot of ways. And I don't think there's one good way to do it. I think the key is also like, don't be afraid to do something different than the overall organizational structure. Like, you don't have to embed just because that's how the organization thinks of it. You have to be able to sell them on your vision for for how you structure your team. But you don't need to follow their org structure just to follow their org structure. You can just be like, this is how we will be most impactful and you'll get the most out of us. And like make the case, but like don't, it's kind of getting back to that, like there's no ratio. It's all about like, how do you align to what the organization needs you to accomplish? And so that's how I also think about like, how do you form and structure a research team, and where do they sit, and how do you organize them?
Thank you a lot for the answer. Thank you.
We are wrapping up. I see one question. It feels like it could be a great question to ask just to wrap everything up. Almost a philosophical one, like a very high level, but very, very important. So Jane, thank you for sharing experience. It's the question from Katerina Kamenets. By the way, Katerina, if you want to unmute, feel free to ask your question. Okay, I can. Okay, go on.
Oh, hi. Yeah, it took me some time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for presenting and sharing your experience. You mentioned many times a good research question as opposed to another very good one. So I was wondering, do you have any tricks or tips how to come up with a really good research question?
Yes. The first thing I always do is ask, what decisions are we trying to make based on this information? That is like, people will come to you and they'll have a solution in mind, right? Like PMs are notorious for this. It's like, they'll be like, I need to know this piece of information. And your job as a researcher is to get them to stop thinking about the piece of information they need. What your job is to do, like your job is to pull them back up to the correct altitude, because they're going to ask for a very specific piece of information. That's the thing that like occurred to them. And so like stepping that back and being like, what are you trying to accomplish? Like, what decision needs to get made? because that lets you start listing what are all of the pieces of information we need. If you start from, oh, I need this piece of information, then the danger there is that there are other pieces of information they need that they didn't think of, and you have to run a different research project for each one of those, because like PMs, in my experience, tend to use the solution as a stand-in for the problem they're trying to solve. That's like not unique to PMs. Like researchers are probably uniquely good at actually talking about the problem instead of the solution, and we expect other people to like be crisp on that too, and they're not. And that's, it's okay. It's good we have things that people are bad at that we're great at. But like, and so always trying to scope it back to like, what is your goal for this? Like what is making you think you need that piece of information? What decision are you trying to make that information will actually ladder up to? And once you've got like, what decision are you trying to make? Then you can start saying like, what are all the pieces of information we need in order to make that decision effectively? And so your research goal is always the same as like the decision you need to make. Like the research goal is make this decision. Like, should we build, like, do people need this product? Or how do people like accomplish this workflow? Like it's really like the decision we need to make is, do we build this feature? Do we like do we do one thing and not the other? And so making sure that you're not just taking people at their word when they say, I need to know this. Way back, I know we're at time and I have another meeting to run to, but like one final story on this, like way back when I started at Dropbox, when I was working like with John for the first time, he was like, I need to know why people don't pay for this. And I was like, why do you need to know that? And he's like, because we want them to pay for it. And I was like, great, John, what decisions would you make? Like, what would you change in the world to get, what are the things you think you might change to get people to pay for it? He's like, uh, okay, I guess we would change like the packaging, the storage offering, maybe the messaging. And I was like, great. Now we're talking about decisions. Like, what is the best, like, what is the correct messaging that resonates? What do people actually want from this product? What do people value? Like, what is valuable about what we provide? Rather than like, why aren't people paying us? Why aren't people paying us is a terrible research question, because like you won't make a decision based on that. What you're trying to do is like make a decision about a change you're going to make to your product or your packaging or something else in the world. So like a good research question is aligned to that decision rather than a specific solution.
I cannot find the best way to wrap up the meeting.
We
Thank
covered
you.
a lot of ground.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, this is a very frequently asked question, but it is really important. And actually understanding that is super important for day-to-day work and for all the strategic initiatives. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. Sophia wanted to add a couple of comments about the chat and some technicalities around the donations.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm responsible for tech things today. So I wanted to say that everybody who participated in the giveaway today will share the results in our chat. I'll send the link right now in our Zoom conversation, so you can join to our Telegram, not channel, but chat. And over there, yeah, you'll see who is the winner of the mentorship session with Mikhailo Moisenikov. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jane, for having us. Not for having us, sorry, but for being with us and sharing all these amazing insights. I was just the last thing you mentioned. I remembered that the Reforge was actually they are teaching the same thing, that you need to have the decision first. So I was thinking that it's wonderful how many things are, all these dots are connecting in the end of the day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if it's the Reforge I'm thinking of, it's Bejad who is like aces at that. So
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This was,
Thank you so much.
I love talking about this stuff. Research is still like my passion, obviously. So these were great questions and loved getting to spend the time with all of you.
It feels like we have to plan the second one for the transition from UXR to PM, because it's also a very important topic.
Yes, that I have thoughts on that one. Excellent. Well, truly, find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Let me know how I can be useful to this community. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, and everyone have a great day, evening, morning, whatever you have.
Thank you a lot, guys.
Thank you.
For
Likewise.
the-
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
for good
Bye.
lecture.
Thank you. Bye.